Art historian Vidya Dehejia has studied the temple and its significance.
Surya invariably holds lotuses in both his hands. Only one is intact here. Why lotuses? Perhaps to suggest that just as the beautiful lotus emerges from dark, muddy waters, so too Surya emerges each day radiantly out of darkness. His chariot is drawn by 7 horses. His charioteer is Aruna, the dawn, and attendants keep at bay the demons of darkness. But when Surya is so evident in the sky and may be worshipped in all his brilliance, why did devotees create an image of the god and place him in temple niches or in the darkness of a temple sanctum? Perhaps the answer is self-evident. Except for a brief time at sunrise and sunset, none may gaze at his brilliance. Once enshrined in an image, he could be worshipped at the height of the noonday sun, or even when the monsoon clouds blotted out his atmospheric presence. In fact, there's an interesting legend that the sun god donned boots and long tunic in order to shield his devotees from his blinding brightness.
Before the temple stands a pillared hall, mostly intact except for its roof. It probably served as a hall for dances, feasts, and other festivities in honor of the sun's glory. Though the Konarak temple seems isolated out here on the coast, it is part of a long recent tradition. We can envision Konarak before its collapse by looking at temples in the nearby city of Bhubaneswar, a virtual museum of the region's architecture. One of the oldest is the 7th century temple with a rectangular flat-roofed hall. The Indian temple symbolizes a sacred mountain, the seat of the divinity it honors. The temple tower is shaped like a mountain and is called a shikhara, literally mountain peak. One enters through the hall and moves towards the center of the mountain. Here, in the small cave or womb-like sanctuary, in mystery and darkness, the worshipper meets with the god. While Surya himself was not enshrined within any temple at Bhubaneswar, his importance was proclaimed early. Riding his chariot, Surya takes pride of place on the front of the tower of this 8th century temple. By the 9th century, the flat roof of the temple hall had been replaced by a pyramidal roof. Small temples began to appear that were true precursors of Konarak. The great Lingaraj temple, built around the year 1000, gives us some idea of Konarak's original grandeur. Smaller shrines cluster around the main temple like foothills, shouldering up to a great mountain. The tower of the Lingaraj rises nearly 40 meters in the air and is topped by a stone amalak fruit. Konarak's tower was once much taller but similar in shape. In other ways, though, the temple at Konarak is unique. Part of the reason for that lies in the story of its builder, a man as distinctive as his creation. The temple is dedicated to the sun, but it is also a celebration of its patron, the 13th century ruler, Narasimhadeva. His wealth, fame, and beneficence once made him a radiant sun among men. Portraits of him in various roles, at ease, at war, or in council, adorned the completed temple. Narasimha Deva ruled Odisha and surrounding territories for 26 years. It is said that he built Konarak in gratitude for several military successes which enriched his kingdom and secured an era of peace and stability. A recently discovered manuscript of uncertain date describes the building process. Hundreds, if not thousands, of stone cutters and other laborers were imported from distant towns. At first, all went smoothly, but the manuscript depicts an increasingly anxious architect being driven by a ruler with an inflexible deadline. Narasimha Deva decided to rush the completion of the temple to coincide with an approaching sun festival. The festival was held without incident, but was the temple inherently unsound? Had shortcuts in construction created weaknesses in its structure? In this frieze that adorns the base of the sanctuary statue, no celebrant has any doubt of the greatness of the occasion. Disaster may have been waiting, but it waited far off. That the temple stood intact at least until the 16th century, we know from the description given by a Mughal chronicler.
Even those who are difficult to please stand astonished at its sight. The eastern portal has carved upon it the figures of two finely designed elephants, each of them carrying a man upon his trunk. The western portal bears sculptures of two horsemen with trappings and ornaments, and an attendant. When 9 flights of steps are passed, a spacious court appears, with a large arch of stone upon which are carved the sun and other planets.
The chronicler's directions help us correctly locate the horses and elephants. The arch he described has today been removed to a shed. The classical Hindu astronomical pantheon included the sun, the moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and 2 other deities associated with the moon, Rahu and Ketu. The demonic Rahu was thought to cause eclipses by temporarily swallowing the sun. Sun worship often increased during a solar eclipse, and one occurred during the construction of Konarak. Perhaps the prediction of this ominous event inspired Narasimha Deva to speed up the building of Konarak in order to ward off danger.
A wealth of sculptural ornamentation covers the walls at Konarak. Everywhere the eye lights is a new detail. Some of it is sheer adornment. Others, like the figures of the serpent beings, the Nagas, protect the temple. Yet others, like the figures of women, add to its auspicious character. The woman clinging to a branch is a motif with age-old significance. For at least a millennium before Konarak was carved, figures of women stood for fertility, for prosperity, and for abundance. By the year 1000, texts for practicing architects and sculptors were in place. We are fortunate in possessing a document written in Orissa itself. It specifies that figures of women are a necessary adornment on a temple. The text uses very strong words. It says, as a home without a wife, as frolic without a woman, so too, without the figure of woman, a temple is of inferior quality and will bear no fruit. The text then proceeds to describe the 16 varieties of women who best adorn a temple made with art. All 16 are seen at Konarak, but the favorites are probably the Nartaki, the dancing girl, the Mardala, the drummer maiden, and the Dala Malika, who pulls a branch of a tree and garlands herself with it.
The Konark temple also features a dizzying array of loving couples warmly embracing.
No single explanation can account for the erotic imagery on temple walls. No doubt, a series of factors worked in combination. To start with, the loving couple, like the beautiful woman, stood for fertility and good fortune. And then we must remember that the goals of life in ancient India were fourfold. There was dharma, or righteous living, artha, prosperity, kama, love, familial and sexual, and moksha, or salvation. Individuals were exhorted to pursue and experience all four goals, not to bypass any in favor of salvation. This rounded view is also reflected in art, so that scenes of love have their rightful place on temple walls. And finally, Konarak's couples may be understood on a metaphorical level as well. According to the sacred texts of the Upanishads, the great bliss of salvation arises when the individual human soul merges with the infinite soul. To explain this difficult concept, the ancient sages often used sexual analogy. They compared the bliss of spiritual union with the sheer joy that arises by losing oneself in one's beloved. Perhaps these sculptures carry the same message in stone.
But several centuries worth of prayers were not enough to ward off Konark's ultimate collapse. When did it happen, and why?
Perhaps the temple collapsed because it was too ambitious a project. The iron beams contained in its tower may have attracted lightning from the cyclonic storms that batter this coast year after year. Certainly, the coarse-grained condylite stone transported over 100 kilometers was a poor choice. When freshly quarried, the agate and other semi-precious stones it contained must have attracted the builders, sparkling like the sun itself whom they wished to honor. But with time, the condylite has decomposed, deteriorated, and crumbled away, and entire chunks have detached themselves from the main fabric. The temple may simply have been abandoned after Narasimha Deva's death, since it was connected so closely with its patron. With the monarch dead, funds for its maintenance may have been curtailed. And gradually, the cult of Surya faded in this region.
In the early 19th century, British surveyors found the temple sadly ruined. It was even believed for a time that it had never been completed. The British called it the Black Pagoda, in contrast to the White Pagoda at nearby Puri. Narasimha Deva was also a devotee of Vishnu, and he and his heirs worshipped Vishnu as Jagannath at Puri. Financial support continued to flow to that temple. Kept whitewashed and in good repair, it stands today, drawing hundreds of thousands of devotees. At some point, the pillar of victory that once stood before Konark was moved to Puri and placed in front of the main gateway. Today, its figure of Aruna, Surya's charioteer, pays eternal homage to Jagannath. That deity, like the sun, is noted for his chariot rides. The Jagannath festival and its towering carts, drawn by hundreds of thousands of pilgrims, are known around the world. The Konarak temple, though no longer a sacrosanct space, still inspires reverence and awe. The primal forces once grandly celebrated at Konarak are still a part of the daily life of India. Echoing down the centuries is an ancient Surya hymn that commands,
May the splendor of the hot rayed one bring unbounded joy to your eyes.
That majesty and joy are still evoked by Konark, the chariot of the sun.